So, Berto, what do you know about Marilyn Manson?
I definitely, when he came on the scene, I definitely got intrigued. And it was just so weird, so intriguing. I loved it. Sort of like a darker NIN.
Did you know anything about his personal life?
Yeah, I actually, years ago, read, I think it was his book. I definitely watched a couple documentaries at some point.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about Marilyn Manson and the allegations. But before we go into it, I want to provide a pretty severe trigger alert. And if there's ever been an episode where you might have some PTSD triggered for you, this is that episode. I thought about trying to tone it down a little bit, but you really can't get into the story without talking about some specifics. And so, no joke, very serious, trigger alert. If you've been assaulted, if you've been harmed by someone, this probably isn't the episode for you. And let's introduce the podcast. This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I design flat earth maps.
So, allegations, let's get into that. Evan Rachel Wood. Do you know Evan Rachel Wood? Do you know what she's from?
I'm sure I've seen her. Is she an actress? Or
Yeah. Well, Westworld, you saw Westworld.
Is she the main gal?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that, but now I know.
The first time I saw her, she was in 13, which was about 20 years ago with...
Was she the girl in 13?
Yeah, Holly Hunter.
What? Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I do know her.
And Running with Scissors, I remember her from that. And
I didn't
she
see
was
that one.
in Across the Universe, which is a Beatles movie that you have yet to
I have
watch.
yet to see.
And many other things. But anyway, with regards to Marilyn Manson, reportedly in the news, she was a former fiance. They had a 5-ish year relationship that was in the late 2000s, so like 2005 to 2010 sort of thing. And she alleges that he was grooming her before she was 18, that she was an underage teen when it started, and that he was in his mid-30s at the time. So then we fast forward to 2018, and she is testifying before Congress to support a Bill of Rights for sexual assault survivors, I believe to lift the statute of limitations for this sort of crime. And she talked about the abuse from Manson without naming his name. And a lot of people suspected she was talking about him, but we weren't quite sure. And she said the following statement. And she said a lot of things, but this is part of it. She said, "The toxic mental, physical, and sexual abuse started slow, but escalated over time, including threats against my life, severe brainwashing, waking up to him raping what he believed to be my unconscious body," end quote. So then we fast forward to just this month, February 2021, and she publicly accused him of the abuse. She named him as the person that she was referring to earlier, and she was the first to come out publicly against him, and according to the news. She alleges that she was beaten and threatened by him, and to keep her silent, he threatened to kill her or kill himself. She said the following things. "If I tried to sleep, he would throw things at me or instruct me to do drugs, which would disorient me and keep me awake, sometimes for days. He would sometimes force me to partake in acts of fear, pain, torture, and humiliation, which he would videotape and which I felt powerless to stop." And there are many other statements like this. And she says that she has PTSD from the trauma, which is not surprising. Again, trigger warning, this is the sort of thing we're going to be getting into. So what do you think about that, Berto?
Yeah, I mean, so this was 2018 when she was testifying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then just this month she came out and said
this is when it, yeah. So I had, like, this had skipped me in 2018. But what's weird is I knew for years that the guy wasn't right. In his biography, like I said, either the one I read or whatever I read, there were some horrific stories. So in a way, I was not surprised. I was definitely horrified. And I guess times used to be so different because, you know, when his band came out and they got popular and stuff, there was almost a glorification of a lot of things within that space. Like, I mean, there's shows, they glorified these kinds of things. And so, Yeah, I just when I heard like this was an issue, I was like, "Yup, I guess that makes sense," and it's terrible.
Yeah, we'll get into his biographies in a second, which he basically admits to this sort of behavior.
Oh, and by the way, I will say, I was hugely disappointed way back, like just ages ago, because when he first came on the scene, I thought I got the message or the joke of it or whatever, because especially like The Beautiful People, which was, I loved that piece of music. I thought that the whole thing was a shtick, but like on purpose. And don't you get it? Like, but clearly I was being fooled twice because, no, they really were chaotic, despotic, like group of people that actually, I'm not really sure that he stood for much in the end. And so when I started reading more about him, I was like, wait a minute, he's not making the point I thought he was making, or at least maybe only the lyrics or something. But because when I saw that song, I thought, oh wow, he's really, pointing fingers at the system and things. But it's like, no, in the end, it's just a circus act. And like, everyone in the band, not everyone, but almost everyone had severe disturbing problems, and he's not excluded from that.
Yeah, that was my thought too, because I'd followed him a little bit and heard him talk really articulately about society and the way he was reacted to, the way parents would look at him, the way he would be vilified for having art. And he seemed like a very well-spoken person, and I thought, oh, okay, he's in on the joke, and he's not afraid to even be vulnerable at times. And I thought, oh, okay, he gets it. He's not actually like that, and he's not afraid to reveal his true self in interviews, and he has a pretty good take on society and this sort of thing. And then you hear about this behavior, and you think, my God, was it all one big smoke screen to protect him from scrutiny? Because people would come in and say, look what he's doing. You're just another one of those women, those moms clutching your pearls. What are we going to do about the children? And all this sort of thing. And then he just continued to get away with it. And it's a really interesting case along those lines, because he was doing it in broad daylight, and it was supported by the system, and it was almost like that was his brand. But most people, it's sort of like if you had a hardcore hip hop guy who rapped about selling drugs and having guns and shooting people, I'm thinking of like the early 90s, this kind of thing. And you have a guy who raps about all that kind of stuff, but then actually participates in psychopathic murder of people for personal gain. And you think, wait, I thought we were just playing a game. I thought you were just expressing a lifestyle, or you had a character that this is actually you. You're actually this is actually what you do. You actually you're actually doing this sort of thing. Yeah. And it's in some ways on us for not saying, well, okay, yeah, there are the clutching of the pearls, and there is the what about the children people, but then there are legitimate people who will abuse people and try to get away with it in broad daylight, and we should really look at that.
There was also, I think growing up in the 80s and like in the 90s, there was definitely a glorification of what rock stars did and could get away with. Because you remember how like, oh my gosh, there's some crazy stories of like Motley Crue destroying a hotel, or oh, the Guns N' Roses guys did this, that, the other thing. And a lot of times the stories would involve like, about groupies and about crazy drug stories and things. And I remember it was glorified. Just being on the outside of that world, I remember being like, oh, there's a cool aspect to all that. And yet, like, if we stop and think about what the things we were glorifying totally dysfunctional, chaotic people with addictions, bringing in very young people into their circle and becoming very chaotic around them. And so, and all of them growing up without tools or tools or definitions or boundaries or anything, to even know that what they were doing was wrong. Yeah, because that's the other thing. Of course, all this has to get brought into the light of day. We have to all move beyond what we've been. But a lot of these people, rock stars, famous movie stars, all these things that have been abusive, grew up in a system where it was like they were sort of unaware that they shouldn't be getting away with all these things. Now, there's some of the stuff I've heard about this guy in particular that just go beyond the pale. Because mostly I was talking about, bringing the idea of bringing the groupies backstage and then having sex with them and things like that. But then this takes it into like the torture and abuse and constant, which is just crazy. But yes, if you read his own words and take it at least at 10% at his words, it's like, this is not new.
Yeah, let's get into his words. Before we do that, though, I just want to name a few other people. After Wood came out, Esme Bianco, do you know who that is?
No.
So she's from Game of Thrones. She was the main sex worker in the show. And she dated Marilyn Manson reportedly. And she also spoke out about an abuser without naming Marilyn Manson at the time. But then she's since named him, I believe. Similar, I think she was speaking out as a way of trying to change the laws for statute of limitations. And she said that he groomed her and tricked her into being in a relationship with him. And eventually he was in complete control of everything in her life, what she ate, who she was allowed to see, locked her in the bedroom, not allowed to sleep, a similar thing to what Wood said, violently shaking her awake for several days, not letting her sleep, trying to control her through that he would bite her during sex non-consensually, and there were bruises all over her body. He would beat her. He posted naked pictures of her online without her knowledge, chased her around with an axe trying to kill her, broke her down mentally, and now she has PTSD, anxiety, and depression. So Esme Bianco's description is very similar to Evan Rachel Wood's description. And it's interesting the way that when these multiple people come forward, how they have an MO. When you talk to the Bill Cosby victims, they will have very similar stories. When you talk to Harvey Weinstein's victims, although he had different profiles, if you will, but there were clusters. There was with Harvey Weinstein, he actually would just full on assault women without trying to butter them up at all, if you will, without trying to coerce them verbally. He would just tackle them and rape them. And then he had this other method where he tried to get them to come up into his room, and then he would just be in his robe and that sort of thing. And so clearly Marilyn Manson, in terms of the allegations, there's a similar pattern of locking into a room, biting, beating, angry outbursts, not allowing them to sleep. And I've never heard that before. I mean, have you ever heard of that torture? No. In terms of you hear that in CIA torture situations, but not torture against your partner, right?
Right. And so this is the kind of stuff. Okay, back in the early 90s, I got into Nine Inch Nails. I really loved his music. I thought it was super cool. And then there was this dark aspect to it. If you listen to the lyrics, if you watch his videos. And then there was this video that was called Broken that was really hard to get a hold of. We had a VHS tape of it. It was this long, extended music video, essentially. But it was told, the thing was filmed sort of from the point of view of found footage of a serial killer. And I was fascinated with this because, I used to be into serial killers and just that thought. But again, I was but it's art. It's a joke. It's not a joke necessarily, but it's not real. We're pretending here. And then when Marilyn Manson came out and Trent Reznor was a big, he signed them and stuff. I thought, oh, weird. This is dialing this act to 11. And their videos were okay, now we're talking 7. This is the movie 7 in a music video, and it's super out there. And at the time, it was before the stop shake type of effect came out in the horror movies all over the place, because I think it was already in Japanese movies, but they hadn't really done it a lot here. But so his videos had that, and then after that, you saw a lot of horror movies that did that thing where the creatures suddenly move several steps, sort of unnaturally. And Marilyn Manson's videos, if you remember, had that where his head would shake, and I was so into that. But again, I thought, okay, I think over the years, whatever traumas he had, he started becoming his persona and sort of like feeling the freedom and the power to like actually walk into that character and play it out for real.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Did it start before he did this and that's why he decided to become this? Or did he have issues and then he branded himself this way because he was interested in this kind of music or this kind of style, and then over time he just lost touch with who he was, or maybe he didn't know who he was, and he just started to absorb the fantasy. You know, we hear about this sometimes where people will create a persona and it's really not them, and then they'll just slowly become that person, even though their identity and the reality is really something else. Right. I mean, I'm trying to think of another example. I thought of Bob Dylan maybe, because people think of him as this guy who roams the lonely streets of Alabama, going from town to town, and don't think twice, it's all right. And he's from Minnesota, and he was just a regular suburban kid, or Bruce Springsteen comes across as this working class. He worked
at a factory for 50 years, dude.
Yeah. But he's cool because he'll actually in interviews talk about how that all is a persona, and his background has nothing to do with the songs that he sings about.
And it doesn't lead to abuse. Right.
And so you just have to wonder, because I don't watch that. You like that kind of stuff. You like the Trent Reznor, who's the other guy who makes those movies. He used to be Rob Zombie.
Well, I didn't like White Zombie, but I loved a couple of the Rob Zombie movies. I still do. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't. I never really liked Nine Inch Nails. I know that you kind of see this progression from Depeche Mode to Nine Inch Nails to Marilyn Manson. I thought Nine Inch Nails was a really crappy industrial non-musical knockoff of Depeche Mode.
Well, I disagree about that.
Something.
No.
Blah, blah, blah.
I will definitely defend. Oh God, I will definitely defend Nine Inch Nails music. Not Marilyn Manson. There's a couple songs I like by Marilyn Manson. For me, Marilyn Manson was a lot more about the videos, the energy, and a couple songs. But Nine Inch Nails musically, we can disagree. And it's not all of their music, but I love their music. But I mean,
Trent Reznor, I respect his soundscapes, his musical or his movie soundtracks,
yeah.
His personality, I think, his dedication. There's a lot of really, I think, respectable things. It's just not for me, is the thing. Yeah. And Marilyn Manson, I was too old by the time that sort of thing came out, and the style of the vocals is just complete opposite of what I'm looking for in music. If there was a different, if there was a different style of the vocals.
Why don't you like it? Why don't you like it?
Yeah, it's like purpose, and fine, art's art. And I know people that are really into that kind of singing, more in the hardcore metal scene, really, is what I'm usually familiar with. But anyway, so Ellie Roselle recently, I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right, but she just recently came out and accused Manson of pointing a camera up her skirt backstage at a festival. She says, quote, "I was shocked to look down and see he was filming up my skirt with a GoPro, and his tour manager simply said, he does this kind of thing all the time." So that's just another piece of his sadism or psychopathy or sexual pathology. I should say, though, his ex-wife, so he was married for a while to Dieta Von Tisse, and she submitted a statement as this was coming out this month. And she says, "To those of you who have expressed your concerns of my well-being, I appreciate your kindness. Please know that the details made public do not match my personal experience during our 7 years together. Had they, I would not have married him in December of 2005. I left 12 months later. I left 12 months later due to infidelity and drug abuse. End quote. So basically what she's saying is people are reaching out to her and being like, well, he must have done this to you too, right? That's why you left him. And she's like, nope, actually, it was infidelity and drug abuse. That's why I left him. He never did anything these things to me.
I've seen this, by the way. I was watching YouTube videos. There was this one I watched of this gal that supposedly had a brief fling with Marilyn Manson or something. And she was saying, well, that's not what I saw at all. So therefore, I don't believe that this is the case.
She doesn't believe Dieta Von Tisse's statement that he wasn't abusive to her?
No. The opposite. She doesn't believe the accusers because she herself didn't experience.
Oh.
She herself, basically, it's this thread that like, if someone is a certain way with someone, they must be that way with everyone. And if they're not, then we can't believe the accuser.
Right.
For example, Ted Bundy probably couldn't have been married, right? And his wife wouldn't have said that they had a loving relationship, or no one would have said anything nice about a serial killer. It's just dumb. In fact, it's the opposite usually. Like, I don't know, he seems so nice. He lived next door to me.
Right.
So I'm not saying that there aren't patterns, but just because someone isn't, and look, it's not like the thing is still going in a healthy marriage, right? Like it ended because of drugs and infidelity. So, I'm not saying that people aren't unfaithful and stuff. I'm just saying that clearly there is already some dysfunction even in that relationship. So we can't just say, oh, but she wasn't abused in the same ways, therefore no one else probably was.
Yeah, it's a weird bias that people have, we all have, that we have this stereotype in our head about what an evil abuser looks like, right? And if they don't look like that to us in our contact with that person, then the other people must be lying. I can't see him doing that because all the time I hung out with him, he seemed totally fine. But that's based on a heuristic of when I see him, he seems to be stable-ish, and thus he's always stable. And it kind of goes both ways, actually. We have this bias where you could experience him and think that he's fine based on your limited experience. But it'd also go the other direction in that people will think that someone with schizophrenia will be noticeably schizophrenic all the time, which is just not true. You can suffer from schizophrenia or any kind of, shall we say, severe mental illness, and you can often appear totally non-symptomatic. And so we have this erroneous idea in our minds based on movies and television around if someone is a crazy person or an evil person, then they're always doing that thing that just bugs me in movies now and TV when evil people they have their chin down to their chest and they're looking at the camera through their eyes. Oh, you know what I mean? That look where they're just like, I have evil face. And that started happening about 15 years ago. And the first time it happened, I was like, oh, okay. And then now every director, it's like, okay, do that evil face.
Evil face.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, there's got to be another way. Anyway, so let's get into his own statements, and then later let's try to diagnose him. But first, let's take a break. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
So, Berto, if there was a Nine Inch Nails song that was trying to get people to become a patron of the podcast, what would that sound like?
I'm so dark today, but I know that you got to say that you'll support the podcast. Because if you don't, I'll stick a nail in each of your toes.
Dark. Okay, let's go to his own statements here. Again, trigger warning reminder, because this is him talking about his own behavior. So in a 2009 Spin interview, so this is 12 years ago, he talked about violent thoughts about his current girlfriend, Evan Rachel Wood, and how his song, I Want to Kill You Like They Do in the Movies, that's the name of the song, I Want to Kill You Like They Do in the Movies, that he was talking about how this song is about, quote unquote, fantasies that he had, quote, every day about smashing her skull in with a sledgehammer. So he is telling a Spin journalist that this song is about fantasies that he had every day about smashing his current girlfriend's skull in with a sledgehammer. That was his words. And again, at the time, you're thinking, oh, he's so dark, or he's saying that in jest, or he has angry thoughts that he just gets out. No, he probably literally had those thoughts and actually wanted to do that at some times. That's the scary part of this.
There's this brilliant South Park episode where the detective, the head of the police station detective, he goes undercover and he's trying to like find, I don't even remember what it is he's trying to go undercover for. But the joke is that he goes deeper and deeper undercover, but he starts doing all these things that are really bad just because he's undercover. And like in this case, it's like, well, at what point, how far do you take the joke, the shtick, the act? Because when you're writing a full album obsessively about your ex and including songs about killing your ex and then talking in interviews about how you fantasize and dream about it, like where do we draw the line and be like, that's funny, but can we stop? Like,
yeah. In The Guardian, same year, he threatened journalists who were speaking out against him, saying, quote, "I am far different than the soon-to-be murdered in their home press has decided to fabricate. If one more quote-unquote journalist makes a cavalier statement about me and my band, I will personally or with my fans' help greet them at their home and discover just how much they believe in their freedom of speech," unquote. Does that sound a little familiar? I'm just going to put it out there. Another interview, he said that he has a small room that if anyone is bad, I can lock them in it, and it's soundproof. It's called the Bad Girl Room. In another interview with Danny Scott, he said, "If I locked my girlfriend in the naughty room the night before, I have to remember to let her out or she gets mad at me." And again, you hear that, and I'm sure he's just joking, or he has some sort of S&M relationship with his girlfriends. No, he literally was non-consensually breaking women down and locking them in a room at night and to control them, and it was soundproof.
But this is the kind of stuff why I gave up on caring years ago. Caring as in caring about the band, this band and his music and stuff, because I was like, wait, this is not funny. Like, this is, and I don't think he's trying to be funny. Like, it's like watching watching the Sex Pistols, and you're like, oh, these guys, man, they're so chaotic, so wacky. Look how crazy the Johnny Rotten guy is. Look at Sid Vicious. Look how he looks like he's on drugs. Oh wait, he's totally on drugs, but he looks like he's gonna fall over it. And he died of an overdose. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like, it's no joke.
Right. And the crowds keep cheering. Right. Yeah. And the victims keep piling up, and the fans keep attacking the people who come forward. So in his autobiography, go ahead.
Sorry, when I was young, I used to have this misconception. I think we talked a bit about this before. And I think it might be common. When I was young, I thought that my brain was immune to stimulus if I wanted it to be. So that if I watched something disturbing or whatever, like, I could handle it. Now, clearly, I didn't fully believe that, because I've also said that I didn't want to watch the Faces of Death videos back in the late or early 90s, because I was afraid, actually. I was like, oh, I don't want to see this horrible stuff. But there was another part of me. It was like, yeah, I could play whatever video game or I could watch whatever horror movie, I could do whatever. And so when I was like in my late 20s, I was going after finding the worst horror movies I could get my hands on. I would look online for the list of the most disturbing movies. But it got to a point where I was watching one of these and I was like, yeah, this is too much. Like, this is too dark. Like, I can't.
Yeah.
And at some point, and maybe it comes with growing older, you're like, I don't think my brain is immune to everything.
Right. Yeah, and art is art. And of course, if we were, in another pocket, we would look at all this stuff and anything close to it as obscene and unnecessary. And if we were a little closer to this art form, we'd be like, I just really like that kind of thing. And I want to allow for that for sure. But it is a question. When does the consumption of a particular art like this infect your head or put people who are susceptible to this sort of thing at risk? And that's probably a better way to put it, is that for 99% of the people who consume this sort of art, it's benign. It's a way to express their anger or their despondency, or to feel like they're in their crew. And for a very small percentage of people, it gets under their skin and they're traumatized by it and or encouraged by it. In his autobiography, he talks about one incident in which he thought his mother was cheating on him, which I didn't really understand. But in this moment, he writes about attacking his mother, and he threw a bottle at her face. So this is him as a child. So he's a child at, I think, maybe 10 or something, 12, 13. And she still has a scar on her lip, he talks about in the book, from him throwing a bottle at her face. It was unclear if he meant cheating on his father or just dating men. I didn't really understand. It's like that he thought his mother was cheating, I think on his father, and he attacked his mother. And then later he wrote that the scar served as her constant reminder never to have another child. So that's kind of an interesting statement, that in his own words, he's talking about his mother, quote unquote, cheating, and he got angry and felt entitled as a teenager or younger person to throw a bottle at her face hard. And then as an adult, in this book, he writes that the scar serves as her constant reminder never to have another child. What does that mean? Does that mean she better understand, or like she knows
self-deprecating? Yeah,
she knows not to have another kid like me.
Like, look how I turned out.
Right.
Don't do this. But what's weird, and this is, so what's weird is I thought that he was, when he was a kid, because I've seen interviews with his dad and his mom and stuff. Like, he seemed quote unquote normal, other than he was a bit of an odd kid, maybe. Definitely into dark stuff and whatnot, but so I that's why I was always confused. I was like, well, okay, I think I get it. I think he's like embracing his dark side, but just, for the show of it. But then, he would, seriously cut himself on stage, and he would do some stuff, and he was doing the drugs, and he was doing all these things. But one of his ex-bandmates who died of an OD used to say that Marilyn Manson wasn't like me, wasn't like some of us, because he actually had two different personas. He had his Marilyn Manson, and then there was Brian, and he could leave the Marilyn Manson aside. And that's what he was claiming. But then other folk have said that, like, over the years, he just became more and more just Marilyn Manson. And he would get super upset if people called him Brian, at least in front of other people, So who knows? Who knows if he was always really like that? Is that story real? There's some of the stories in the book that are other people have disputed. Who knows?
Yeah, it's interesting to think. Was the real Brian someone that was quote unquote normal, or was that Brian also a person who liked to take sadistic pleasure in harming other people? Because you could be a normal Brian walking around without your makeup and just, watching Netflix, and also be a sadist, which we'll get into later.
Yeah.
Just a little, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. And we've talked before about how you get money and fame and power.
Yeah.
And now you can start heading down a path where you can get away with a little bit and get away with a little bit more, and you can
Yeah. And to be clear, it's not the money that causes the sadism. The sadism was there, and without the money, you wouldn't have been able to act it out. You probably would have sublimated it into, I don't know, playing video games or something. But just to take a jog into his childhood a little bit while we're on the topic, I couldn't find anything online about his childhood much, but the details I did read, and I don't know if it's accurate or not, there were some sites that claimed his grandfather was allegedly into bestiality, and his dad told, and this is actually, I think, in his book, that his dad told him he might have suffered from PTSD from the Vietnam War, from killing so many people. His father worked a lot and was distant. He was an only child. He became enmeshed with his mother. He became a very angry teenager, and he talked about lashing out at his mother. He was sent to Christian school that he hated. He was beaten up by other children who thought he was gay. So he was bullied, apparently. And that might have been the breeding ground for his personality. But there are a lot of people like that. So, and later on when we talk about his psychology, I think we'll talk about just how odd his presentation is, although it is a particular personality. Getting back to his autobiography, he said about his mother, "I hit her, spit on her, and tried to choke her. She never retaliated. She just cried, and I never felt sorry for her." So again, just talking about, whether he is apologetic of it or not, he clearly remembers and wrote about being a very angry and harmful person as a young person. It's one thing to lash out in anger. It's another thing to throw a bottle at someone's face, hit her, spit her, try to choke her, and then, at the time, just having no remorse. I mean, just imagine, no matter how much anger you could actually feel towards your mom, can you imagine doing anything along these lines? Just anything. Just violent. It's one thing to be like silently in your room, smoking pot and getting angry at your mom. It's another thing to physically want to rip her apart, right? That tells you something about what's going on for him, and maybe his traumas too. I don't know. He didn't talk about going through any kind of major trauma growing up, but anyway. In another publication, he wrote that he abused a quote-unquote weak-willed kid who was his assistant. And here's his words. "I put him through hell. I would have physical altercations with him. I told him I would pay him $100 if I ever hit him unintentionally, and then I got drunk one time and laid $500 on the table and beat the shit out of him." So that tells you something too. That's his admission. Imagine what that assistant would say. Paying your assistant, your employee, $500 and then beating the shit out of them. And he had multiple physical altercations. This is someone who wanted to abuse other people physically. You couldn't pay me enough money to do that to someone. You know what I mean? Like, he wanted to do this. He paid money to do it. He risked his entire career. His entire career is now going down the tubes because he wanted to do this so badly. Again, we'll get into the psychology of this later.
So then there's things that trip me up. So, and of course, this is just words, but when his mom passed away, I saved this quote. He tweeted, "Mother, to the first and greatest believer in me, I hope I see you again someday, but not now because I have more things I promised I would do. I'll make you proud and satisfied that you know that you made the son you wanted. I love you." And it's just because she's dead. Is he making? Wasn't or like where's the act? Where's the reality?
Well, you can have both. One, it could all be an act, the whole thing, either or both. But you can also be violent. I mean, I've worked with plenty of families where I have seen that kind of violent behavior from children towards their parents. And those children can have very sweet moments as well. So anyway, because of all this, he was dropped by his record label, his talent agency, his manager of 25 years. He was removed from future episodes of the TV series American Gods and Creep Show and all these different things. And Marilyn Manson issued a statement on Instagram saying, "Obviously, my art and my life have long been magnets for controversy, but these recent claims about me are horrible distortions of reality. My intimate relationships have always been entirely consensual with like-minded partners, regardless of how and why others are now choosing to misrepresent the past. That is the truth." So he is saying they were entirely consensual, but a lot of other people would disagree with that. So obviously we've seen this before, again, Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein, and several others. And what are the commonalities that we see between the story of Marilyn Manson, Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby? in terms of like how it played, the way that they acted and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, especially between the Cosby and the Manson stuff, there is that aspect of grooming and the consistency of the stories, which is really interesting. But what's so different in my mind is that, and maybe it's because I wasn't paying attention, but we never heard Cosby telegraphing all this publicly in interviews and stuff.
Right.
And maybe it's because Cosby's public persona was at odds completely with anything like that, whereas in Marilyn Manson's case, it amplified his marketing persona. Like, he would sell more records by doing and talking about these kinds of things, or by talking about these kinds of things.
Right. What about commonalities to how society or the progression of the suppression of evidence? Is there commonalities?
Well, that's okay. And maybe not with Cosby, although apparently people in the comic world knew, but with Harvey Weinstein and with Marilyn Manson, that's why I was saying, like, I feel like for years I've known that there was something not right, that, and then with Harvey Weinstein, it seems for years people were like talking about it, rumoring about it, whatever. But nothing really happened. And all those interviews, all those quotes, everything is from years ago. So it's really, and what you were saying, like, she came out in 2018, she didn't name him, but everyone was like, oh, it must be him. It must be him. And yet nothing really happened.
Right. Yeah, that's such the most bizarre thing. And if anyone is still a holdout that feminism is a needed movement in our society, then listen to this, because it happens all the time. And these are just the sensational stories. There are thousands, millions of other people who never make the headlines because they're not famous. But let's talk about the commonalities between all these stories. One is that they all abuse people, right? Weinstein, Cosby, Manson, they abuse people. The victims try to find justice, but people shut them down, and including the perpetrator will shut them down. So they're unsure if they can come forward, but they try to come forward. Society doesn't pay attention. More victims are led to the abuser because no one is listening to the victims. The perpetrator learns he can do whatever he wants. He's like, oh, wow, for years I've been trying to hide this, but it actually has been, I was worried there for about a month, but nothing happened. Well, goody two-shoes for me. Let's go for it. The abuse escalates. It gets worse. Years and years and years go by until what? And tell me this, Berto. Is it a critical mass? Is it the right celebrity has to come forward? Is it a slow news week that allows this story to become front page news? I mean, like you've been saying with Harvey Weinstein and with Cosby and with Marilyn Manson, the stories that are coming out this month are not the first time it's been revealed, even by himself. Why has it taken so long?
Yeah, it is puzzling. Obviously, something happened in 2019. Something as in the dam broke. It's unclear why that year, but then all of a sudden society, we are as a whole, we're like, okay, I guess we're not okay with this. We're going to have to say no.
Okay, so that's probably a factor. Me Too, right? Hashtag Me Too movement, which is a wonderful thing. And that explains some of it. But we are 2 years after that, and Marilyn Manson was allowed to continue doing this sort of thing. Why did it take 2 years?
Well, I mean, okay, there is the thing of like, you can't just go after people from rumors. That you can't do. You shouldn't do. And I'd say, it takes people actually, sadly, but it takes people coming out and saying, okay, this happened to me. And when one person comes out, you got to let the authorities investigate. As a public, I don't think you can you shouldn't just lynch people just because like someone raises their hand and says that person is bad. It's just that after multiple people come out with consistent stories and then you look at a pattern, then you have to decide, both as a consumer audience, both as a business, etc. Do we keep doing business? Do we keep patronizing this person or this business or whatever? And I think that's what's changed, because before it was rare. It was rare that someone would, be highlighted as an abusive person, and then society kind of en masse would say, okay, we're done with that individual or that individual's wares for now. But I think that's the big difference is now there are several tools that came together, and it's a terrifying power in some ways, but like the internet has created these very combustible reactions. And they are, I say terrifying because it's the same kind of thing that can lead astray because people react as a group.
Yeah.
Where it works, it seems like what it's doing is it's bringing things to light, and it's not allowing things to get swept under the rug because the power of the group is too strong. So the group goes, no, like we're not going to be okay with this. Whereas it used to be like, shh, just pay the DA or just do the thing, just keep it quiet. Right. And now that's not happening as easily. Although I will say, like, it's also an illusion because things get out in the public, but as far as the law is concerned, there's no laws laws aren't really changing that quickly right now. But there's that. And then the other thing that's happening is right now, this is a year where we just got through like a pandemic year. And so I wouldn't call it a slow news thing. It's almost like there is a little bit of breathing room right now for stories.
Right. Yeah,
because it's like,
that's what makes me wonder if this had happened in December or even November, would Evan Rachel Wood's story even been paid attention to?
It's hard, right? Because it's like every day there was some crazy story about everything, pandemic and politics and stuff.
Yeah. So let's talk about the legal system because it does support this. We know scientifically that victims often blame themselves into silence until they recover somewhat, which usually takes years, and then they're able to come forward and accuse their criminal, their perpetrator, their abuser. The legal system needs to change to reflect reality of psychological trauma. We have this thing that's generally called the statute of limitations. It's statute meaning that it's a statute, a rule, if you will, a law of limitations. And one of the limitations is that you can't accuse someone of a victim that happened a long time ago. So why do we have these statutes of limitations, Brito? Why in the world do we need this?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the law well, but I guess in some cases, with some things, I could see the logic of take for example, like, kid 17 steals the loaf of bread. They're starving, and then 50 years later, they come and sing an operatic song about it and arrest them and throw them in jail. I think that's not necessary. It's going too far.
Well, why? So, I agree, but why? What is it about that makes it unnecessary? They broke the law, and they
broke the law. But it's the nature of the offense, at the length of time, and what was the damage done, so to speak. I think when it comes to some crimes, there should not be an expiration, right? It should be like, murder, and I think abuse and rape and other things, like there should be a broad set of things where we're just not okay with it expiring. We're like,
right. Well, the reasons why I read online, I think on Wikipedia, as to why there are general statutes of limitations, and I'm sure lawyers would have more to say about this, but the little bit I read had three reasons that they cited. One is that a victim needs to pursue justice with reasonable diligence. So when a victim is a victim of a crime, they need to pursue justice with reasonable diligence. And so the question is, why? What do you think?
Again, for some things, fine. Like, you stole my pencil. I didn't report it. I didn't think it was a big deal. Years go by, decade later. I'm like, gosh, I don't like that Kirk guy. And he did take my pencil. I'm going to go report him to the authorities. That's kind of ridiculous, man. You just took my pencil.
I don't agree. If I stole your pencil, I broke the law.
Well, clearly I didn't care that much. It was just a pencil.
Well, okay,
but I'm trying to get at that there's got to be bounds of reason. For example, like Kirk burned my house down, and I was so shocked, so traumatized that I couldn't say anything. But now, 30 years later, I I have the courage to say, Kirk burnt my house down. And there should not be a limit on that. Like,
Right.
and certainly because some of these crimes, it's like, oh, if you say anything, we'll come after your family. Or just, if you just tell anyone what I've done to you, you will. Like, so many of these things are personally traumatizing. They're threatening. The person feels threatened for their life.
Yeah.
It's no surprise it would take an indefinite amount of time to be able to talk about it.
Well, and as I was saying, victims often blame themselves or think that they brought it on themselves because the perpetrator will often break down their psychology and their personality such that they will brainwash them into thinking that way, and it takes years for them to unbrainwash themselves. Two other reasons that they identified: if the victim waits too long, the defendant might have lost the necessary ability to disprove the claim. So if I stole your pencil, Berto, and then 10 years later you're like, he stole my pencil, and then I'm like, no, I didn't. And you're like, well, disprove, you're going to have to, I'm going to be like, well, it was 10 years ago. I didn't know I needed to keep track. I don't have I don't have an alibi. I don't have any. So, that makes some sense, but that could be considered in court if there were the sort of circumstance we're talking about. The third reason is that it might result in more cruelty than justice for the perpetrator. And that one doesn't make any sense. Who cares about the goddamn perpetrator? Like, if you're a perpetrator of a heinous crime like this, I don't care if the system is somehow cruel. How is it cruel to you to be convicted of a crime that you did? Do you know?
Yeah.
And you benefited from 15 years of getting off scot-free. Now is your time when the punishment begins. And so, if anything, you won that situation because you should have been in jail this whole time, Anyway, so let's get into that. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. One thing that I think the laws aren't well drafted around this area of mental and sexual and physical abuse because, and I don't understand enough about it, so I'm sure I'm misunderstanding it, but it seems to me that context is really hard to come by in these trials, meaning, because, 50 years go by. Someone out of the blue says, hey, 50 years ago, this person raped me. Okay. And then the other person says, no, absolutely not. That didn't happen. And so, you have a trial. Let's say there's no statute of limitations. You have a trial, and there's not going to be any evidence. Like, there's no physical evidence. There's no physical evidence whatsoever. So it's mostly, are there any witnesses? And it's really hard. You can't go back. It's like really hard to do. But the thing is, what if there's this additional context where 10 other women or people came out then and also accused the person? And it's really interesting because I believe that you can't actually do the equivalent of a class action lawsuit.
That's interesting. You might be able to civically sue someone. I don't know if there is a statute of limitations, but the crime, and we did see actually a version of this with the Kavanaugh hearings. It wasn't a criminal hearing, but it was an accusation, and it and guess what? He was granted the seat, and so the system, in a sense, said, well, or I guess to be specific, the people reviewing the evidence said, well, we're unconvinced because it was so long ago, and we're taking into account that Kavanaugh, it was so long ago, he doesn't have really a chance to defend himself because he didn't know he needed to gather alibis or anything, and people can't really identify dates. And so anyway, I just think that the law definitely needs to change. It has changed for other kinds of crimes, for childhood crimes sometimes. But we need to change the crimes all over the United States. Right now, every state has its own specific sort of version of this. And we definitely, I think, need to start changing things for the better.
We'd have to go back in time in some ways, which is impossible because we would have to go back to the 70s, 80s and tell everyone, hey, FYI, the following list of things are not okay. So, like, if this happens or you see this happen, like, it's not okay. Like, talk about it. Like, start reporting. Like, it doesn't. It's and because that's the part of the problem with so many things in this area is that a few decades ago, or even just 1 decade ago, but certainly 3 decades ago, people were a lot more confused about these boundaries.
Right.
Like,
I know,
yeah.
I think I know what you're saying. What you're saying is that, let's say, well, even Evan Rachel Wood, it would have been 15 years ago-ish.
Yeah.
We would have to go back in time and say, okay, every witness to this abuse, understand that what Marilyn Manson is doing is wrong.
Yeah.
Because that wasn't assumed. We live in 2021 right now where we're enlightened to a lot of things that we were not in the past. And back then, I'm guessing the majority of Americans would have been like, well, she's willingly his girlfriend, right? So, why doesn't she just leave? If she's
seen his videos, right?
Well, and she could leave at any time. So obviously she's doing it because she wants to. And today we understand, and I understood. You and I would have understood. Well, would you have understood? I would have, because I mean, treat people
to some extent, like, to some extremes, yes. But if you don't, like, look, I don't know when, but you rewind the clock far enough, and you're like, dude, I heard, or not you, but someone's like, I heard this crazy story of this rock star, and this like 15-year-old girl came in the backstage, and they did this crazy. I wouldn't have back then been like, oh my gosh, did they report him to the authority? Like, I would have been like, oh, that's crazy, man. That's a crazy story.
And that she wouldn't have gone backstage if she didn't want that to happen.
And they're rock stars. What's the point of being a rock star if you're not doing crazy, damaging stuff to people's psyches, Yeah. Like, this is the thing. Like, that wasn't the understanding. It was all over movies and media. It's bizarre. We just started living in the modern era. Like, there's no understanding of, it's like bullfighting. Like, I hate bullfight. I think it's terrible stuff. But my mind has expanded in this regard. Not, I don't like it. I don't think they should do it, period. But I've come to understand that just a blink ago, humans could only survive by constantly slaughtering creatures that they owned. And yet I grew up in a like city where I never saw an animal die. And so like my understanding of reality is completely different. So we don't get what's going on. And therefore, we don't understand what a rock star is and what a rock star should or should not do. And we're just now waking up to like, oh, wait, just because you're famous and you're a rock star doesn't really entitle you to abuse. Oh, and abuse, what is that word in the first place?
Yeah. And that you could brainwash someone to not talk and to feel like it was all their fault. And it doesn't mean you're a weak victim by being broken down like that. Anyone can be broken down like that under the right circumstances. So getting into the dark tetrad, which I've talked about before, and I'm not diagnosing Manson on this because I haven't assessed him. We can only look at the internet, which has to be taken into consideration as we do this discussion. But just as a demonstration of the dark tetrad, let's go over them one by one. And Berto, you tell me if this fits since you're a non-clinician, you can say whatever you want. But in terms of what you've seen presented to you, does Marilyn Manson seem like a good candidate for a worthy analysis in this category? The first one is psychopathy. This is, in the dark tetrad sense, this is the absence of empathy. This is indifferent to the feelings of others, lack of remorse, but not necessarily sadistic. So this is lack of empathy, lack of remorse, indifferent to other people's. Other people could be suffering, and you're like, I don't really care. Does Marilyn Manson have enough reason to believe we should assess him for that?
It's hard to say. Clearly he says things that seem that way, but he also says things where he does express remorse, and he talks about his relationship with ex-bandmates and about how he still cares for them. And it's really odd. And also we have accounts from other people and in relationships or have had relationships with them that speak kindly about it. And so it's hard to tell.
Yeah, he definitely had the capacity for a seeming lack of empathy given his behavior, but yeah, you round it out pretty well. Number 2 is narcissism. This is the not necessarily narcissistic personality disorder, but in the dark tetrad sense, this is the feeling of entitlement. You might brag a lot, you'll be grandiose, you'll be self-centered, you'll be dominant, you'll think of yourself as superior, and again, not necessarily psychopathic or sadistic. Did what we know about Marilyn Manson exhibit enough to justify an assessment of the dark tetrad narcissistic trait, Berto?
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, the guy has built a whole persona for decades that is glorified, and he really embraced it publicly, constantly. But I guess, as we've said before, you have to be a narcissist to perform. But to what extent?
Right. You and I are narcissists because we have a podcast, in that we think of ourselves so highly that we talk with each other and then post it on the internet expecting people to listen. So there's a little bit of narcissism in there. And any famous person who actually likes to be on stage, at least somewhat, has a streak of narcissism. But that's not really what we're talking about here. The version of narcissism we're talking about here is a distortion of reality that you're superior to everyone on the planet, particularly people close to you. And again, we don't know. You could look at his persona and go, "Oh my God, he's so narcissistic." But people do that all the time because they don't really understand what at least this version of narcissism is referring to. What this version of narcissism is referring to is constantly, in every single context, in every relationship, this person secretly believes or overtly believes that they are superior to everyone and treats everyone as such. Now, he treated other people pretty horribly, but it's unclear if he's narcissistic. And according to you, Berto, knowing a little bit about how people talked about him, there were different accounts. Some people said he was a horrible person. Some people said he was a lovely person. That doesn't sound like a consistently narcissistic individual, but I don't know.
Well, and when you listen to his interviews, other than the horrible tidbits he throws out about things he's done to people or what he wants to do to people, but he actually doesn't. It's weird. Like, he doesn't sound like certain other people we could think of that all they can say is how great they are and how everyone should treat them about how great they are.
Right.
And that's not how he comes off.
Right. Yeah. The third of the dark tetrad meaning 4, is Machiavellianism. So this trait is reserved for people who are manipulative, they make plans, they're very scheming. And again, not necessarily sadistic, but they will try, they'll at night when their head hits the pillow, their mind often goes to, okay, how am I going to get back at that person? Or how am I going to pull the wool over that person's eyes? Or how am I going to manipulate that individual? Because there's a big difference between impulsive, harmful behavior towards people and premeditated harmful behavior towards people. And people who are Machiavellian will, it's almost like a pleasure or a defense mechanism that they frequently indulge in, of just like, oh, I'm so angry at Berto, you and I have been angry at people. There are people where, that person made me angry. But we don't sit there and go like, okay, what's the plan? What's the scheme? How am I going to get back at that person?
Well, you don't hear about people that I'm angry at because you never hear about them again.
Right. So,
but and so I haven't
trait?
Seen that.
You're
no,
right.
I haven't seen that. Like, it may be, but to me, honestly, from the stories and as far as I could gather, there's a couple things that seem more evident to me. One, extreme insecurity. And because he's described by at least her and a couple others as like extremely jealous and very controlling, and things that I can relate to from when I was young. And I was like, oh man, I could see that. Ooh, I could see that getting away from him. And that's one. And then the second one is he's embodied this persona that has aspects of his dark nature, trauma, all these things. But he probably thinks of it as like, no, I mean, that's what I do. In a way, and I certainly don't mean to equate these things, but imagine that you are into sadomasochism and you do a set of things. You have whips, chains, things, you strap people up, you do a whole bunch of things. It's not like you think of yourself as a serial killer torturer. This is just like what you're into. And of course, everyone's consenting and all these things. That's how it needs to be. But that's your persona. In his case, he's probably convinced himself or agreed in his mind that, yeah, he's a weird guy. And like, but what, you know this about me. I bring you in. I mean, this is what we do. We're chaotic. And And yeah, of course I put you in this room, but you know that, like, that's what we do. And so I think it's a combination of these things. And then they turn dark when he's like, it combines that jealousy with insecurities and then this persona. I don't know that he's sitting there plotting the demise of people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to know. It could be because maybe he had a whole plan in the background manipulating and grooming these young women. Maybe he had a whole thing in the background of how to manipulate the media, but there's no overt signs that we can tell from the internet or reading his books.
I could be completely wrong, though, because I just realized when you write an entire album about someone, including someone killing them, and then maybe I'm wrong about this one.
Well, so again, it's hard. We'd have to know what is going on in his mind. We'd have to hear his process. If he was like, well, yeah, this and that. But okay, let's go into number 4. So this is the kicker. This is sadism, part of the dark tetrad.
Yeah.
This is enjoying hurting other people. You get a thrill from making other people suffer. Berto, Manson, what do you think?
I mean, that one seems clear unless everyone around him and him are always lying about the stories.
Right. So of the dark tetrad, 4 components of psychopathy, narcissism, Machiavellianism, sadism, he clearly, according to his behavior that are alleged, according to his own description, as you say, according to his behavior, he definitely seems to get a thrill from making other people suffer. So that is the quote-unquote diagnosis. We used to actually have it called sadistic personality disorder, and I've always been promoting the idea of returning it. We used to have psychopathic personality disorder. We used to have sadistic personality disorder. There was a proposal to add sexual sadism as a personality disorder. These are particular things that I think need to be delineated, because you can be psychopathic, you can lack empathy, but not take pleasure in hurting other people. And the reverse they're often correlated, but the reverse can be true as well. You can take pleasure in harming other people and have remorse for it and care about other people's feelings. Sadism and psychopathy are highly correlated, but they're not necessarily always in the same person. And so we really need to understand what we're talking about with someone like Manson is a problem with sadism. It's a problem with getting off on watching other people suffer and getting off on watching other people suffer non-consensually. That's the problem.
Right.
And we need to really identify that and delineate those people from quote-unquote psychopaths, because a lot of people on the internet, when they talk about psychopathy, they're actually thinking of a sadist. They're saying, that person harms other people willy-nilly. There are people who have psychopathic traits who don't harm anyone because no one ever gets in their way for whatever reason. And they lack empathy, and they don't necessarily have great relationships, but they're not like actively out to harm you necessarily.
What about this aspect that, look, it's quite possible, probably very likely, that in his head, because he's publicly stated that, look, I never did anything with anyone that wasn't consensual, something to that effect. I think in his head, that's probably the way he feels about it. Like, what are you talking about? Like, first of all, I meet her. She's totally obsessed about me.
Meaning that he rationalizes it or something?
It rationalizes, but in the sense that, like, who knows exactly how this progressed, right? But in his mind, he's probably like, wait a minute. I meet her. She's obsessed about me. Like, we start doing things. She knows what I'm into, and like stuff like this. So, and then she seems to be into it. Like, I mean, yeah, of course, it's like there's a bit of like pain and struggle, but I mean, that's what we do.
Yeah, I like your point, and I would have a hard time believing anyone with 2 brain cells to rub together would be able to rationally rationalize that given the accounts. We're talking about raping people while they're sleeping, drugging them. We're talking about keeping them awake. We're talking about locking them in a room. We're talking about breaking them down. We're talking about grooming children. So yeah, it's possible that he rationalized, and they often do. Abusers often will completely rationalize it. Oh, it was always consensual. They knew what they were getting into. But anyone who would stop him and say like, well, do you have a safe word? And they're like, well, no. What do you let them do what they want to do? The behavior was so all-encompassing. Again, I just want to read, just to remind us all of what Esme Bianco was saying. He was in complete control of her life, what she ate, who she was allowed to see. He would lock her in the bedroom. He wouldn't allow her to sleep. He would violently shake her awake for several days. He would bite her during sex, non-consensually. There were bruises. He would beat her. He chased her around with an axe. I mean, how can you argue that that's a consensual act, chasing someone around with an axe? So now, does he rationalize it to himself? Could we hook him up to a quote-unquote lie detector that doesn't exist? And would he pass it? Yeah, it's possible. People go into denial for all sorts of reasons. But I could also see how he actually doesn't rationalize it to himself, because he does talk about it kind of openly sometimes, you know?
It's just, yeah, what I've seen a lot, though, is like in cases of cults where, I'm not saying this was a cult, but it's, it could be, like if you got more and more people, but the cult leaders do terrible things. And while they're in it, the cult members are like, yeah, no, but this is all, I want this, I love this. And of course, from the outside looking in, like, no, you're being abused. And then after, if they happen to get out, they can say, oh, I was being abused. So for the cult leader, while they're in it, of course they can rationalize it, because they're like, you outside worlders don't understand. Like, these people love me. I'm helping them.
Right.
And of course, we on the outside are like, yeah, no, you're crazy, and they're abused. So I could see the story forming in his mind. And who knows, maybe he was aware the whole time about how horrible he is. Who knows? But because he could have been like, no, man, this is me. I'm Marilyn Manson. What do you expect happens at Marilyn Manson's house? Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now, that would be part of that narcissism thing. And by the way, I want to clarify that I'm not saying he's not psychopathic or narcissistic or Machiavellian. I'm just saying, from what we could see on the internet that we did, there's not strong evidence of it, but he absolutely could have. He could have all four of these traits in full glory. We just don't have access to any sort of data. And maybe you do, listening out there. All right, so let's end with talking about BDSM, because I feel like he's being confused with BDSM. And you mentioned it, that BDSM is a framework for people to consensually explore dynamics of power and sensations. That's the definition. A framework for people to consensually explore dynamics of power and sensations, like physical sensations. It's always consensual. People need to understand that. What he is doing is abuse. And no one who participates in BDSM would confuse what he is doing with BDSM. What does BDSM stand for, Berto?
Sadomasochism is the last part.
Yeah. People always forget the first day. It's bondage discipline.
Bondage discipline. But hold on, though. That's another one of those things where you rewind the clock just some amount of time, and BDSM was seen as a dark, dark thing that anyone was into that, man. Yeah. They're into some bad stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the next frontier is a little bit of anti-kink shaming movement that I think needs to happen. There's still in fact, well, I won't go into it, but there's still a lot of kink shaming that's happening from people that know better.
And it's not like BDSM started with a full set of rules that everyone knew about, right? So, like, this is the other thing that for decades, like, we saw images of like the ball, the gag in the mouth, like in Pulp Fiction, all these things. And like that was like some dark, weird underbelly sex thing. But there was also this wink of like, if someone's into it, God bless their heart. But there was never a discussion about like the mutual consent and the sign here on the paperwork. That's been like a recent phenomenon for those of us on the outside.
Right, on the outside. On the inside, they've been doing it for years. What movies can you think of that have BDSM in it?
Tokyo Decadence.
Okay, what else?
The Secretary.
Secretary, yeah. That's a great example of BDSM. What else?
The Pulp Fiction.
The big one. Yeah, Pulp Fiction, I guess.
I don't remember. What else? Oh, wait. No.
50 Shades of Grey.
Oh, yeah, I didn't see that one.
A Dangerous Method, which is about Jung with Keira Knightley and Michael Fassbender. And 9.5 Weeks with Kim Basinger and Mickey Rourke.
You know, I never saw that.
I did when it came out, and I remember really not liking it. This is back when Kim Basinger and Mickey Rourke were at the height of their powers. They were, the hottest couple in Hollywood, and I remember it was quite a sensation. And I just remember these long scenes of sex happening with, I think there were like ice cubes and food involved, and I just remember being like, get on with it. I just did. All right, let's go into some stats here, Berto. Percentage of people reporting having participated in BDSM at least once, even though they might not call it BDSM. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Percentage of people having participated in BDSM at least once.
20%.
Close, 10%. Percentage who are interested in sadism or aroused by sadism for men. Percentage of men.
5%?
19.
19%?
Yeah. Well,
Yeeksers.
What do you mean, yeeksers?
Like they're interested in pain for pleasure.
Well, they're interested in the sadism side that's consensual, which is like tying people up or spanking someone or controlling someone, holding someone down.
I don't like it.
Okay, you don't, but 19% of men do.
I don't like that there's that much of it because I don't know, it reveals something, I think.
Why? It's consensual.
It's for the same reason I don't like hunting, and I don't like. It's like
why don't you like hunting?
This is the side of the universe that I don't like. It's the destructive side of the universe.
But it's consensual between two people. You're actually you're kink. I don't want to call it kink shaming, but you're like, I don't know, you're kink otherizing or something. It's like,
all right. I guess if I think of it the way if I enjoy a horror movie, does that make me a terrible person? No.
Right.
So if I enjoy the idea of it, but we're all in this together, and blah, blah. So you're right. Okay, I am a backwards individual, and I need to enlighten myself.
Good. What percentage of women want to be a sadist consensually, sexually? They're interested. They get aroused.
50%.
10%.
Okay.
So half the amount of women, but still a sizable amount of women want to.
I'm sad now. I'm sad that it's only 10%.
Percent who are of men interested in masochism, meaning they want to be bonded, they want to be whipped, they want to be controlled.
19 for the other. Okay, 12%.
Close, 15. Percentage of women, and again, they didn't do queer people or non-binary people as the usual in research, but percent of people who are into masochism.
Women who are into 17.
Oh my God, on the money.
Oh boy.
Wait, I feel like you need to get a prize or something.
A little leather.
That's because
whip.
It wasn't 20. It was 17.
It was 17.
How do you
got it?
I mean, that's incredible. Percentage of women who have rape fantasies. Every once in a while, infrequent. At least infrequent rape fantasies about being raped.
Oh women. My God. Is that one okay? I guess.
Yeah,
it's okay to fantasize.
It's consensual. I mean, one, it's just a fantasy, right?
Yeah. 12%.
50%.
50%?
Yeah.
Half of women have fantasies of being raped.
Yeah. I mean, but we have to expand what rape means. There are different kinds, and we actually did a whole episode. Were you with me? I thought you and I did a whole episode on this.
I don't remember.
Where there are different kinds of rape fantasies, where people will have a fantasy where they are being full-on raped, but that's not as common as being raped like the way the bodice ripper books are like, where the woman, she wants it, but she doesn't want to admit she wants it. And the man like just says, I'm going to have you. And deep down, she kind of wants it.
It's the James Bond rape.
Right. So there's that kind. And again, this is fantasy. We're talking about fantasies that you think about while you masturbate or while you are having sex in a different way, or just things you like to think about or read about. It's just fantasies. It's not real. There's a huge chasm between sexual fantasies and reality. And 50% of women have these kind of fantasies. And again, if anyone's listening and confusing this for like a permission to rape anyone, this is not, of course. So make no joke about it. Rape and non-consensual sex is complete. Any non-consensual anything is wrong. And so just understand that. Right. But a lot of people, percentage of women who have frequent rape fantasies, meaning when they are asked a question. Do you have
Okay, I'm going to drop that one to 25.
close 15%.
Okay.
Percentage of men who fantasize about raping people. Again, these are just fantasies. It's just what turns you on. Vast majority of these people would never want to in reality and would abhor that. But percentage of men who fantasize.
But dude, like, because like at some point I'm going to draw the line on what you're fantasizing about.
Well, okay. So to be clear, some people who fantasize about it actually will do it. So I'm not saying it can't be a bad thing, but for the vast majority who do think about it in the same way the vast majority of people
I'm going to draw a line at, there's one thing when you're fantasizing about things happening to you. And there's another thing when you're fantasizing about you doing things to others. And of course, we're not in brain control county here, but like, it's like, some people fantasize about taking an AK and killing 100 people. Like, that's not okay. We need to do something about that. Because the more they fantasize, I don't know what's going to happen. So, like, I don't like that one.
Okay, what percentage?
12%.
30%.
God damn it. 30% of guys sit there fantasizing about raping.
Well, not all the time, but they report on a survey that they have. Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, do we not see any problem with half the people over here fantasizing about being raped, the other third fantasizing about raping?
It's just fantasies, my friend.
But your brain is not that, like,
for
vacuum sealed.
For a very small percentage. And you're right. You're 100% right. You're right about a minority of people. You're 100 billion% right. And your discomfort.
When people fantasize about drinking a beer, guess what? When people see commercials about Coke, guess what? You know what I mean?
Well, so you're 100 billion% right. And I'm glad you're uncomfortable. But the fact is that this is all in the realm of what we would consider to be BDSM, which is consensual. There's a whole group of people, millions upon millions, according to these stats, maybe even like 1 or 2 billion people on the planet are turned on by various different acts of sadomasochism, whether it's bondage or ball gags or tying people up or whipping people or hitting. And you remember we went to that sex club for a podcast. One of the very first podcasts we went to this Center for Sex Positive Culture in Seattle on the hottest day ever recorded in Seattle. And everyone's ripping off their clothes in the sex club. And you and me, Berto, are dressed to, we're in our club clothes and we're
sweating.
Yeah, we're not even taking
the oldies.
I remember we left our jackets on because we
didn't want to put my jacket down.
Yeah. And there are people having sex on the ground and there are people being beaten. And there are so many scenes that even though this was 12 years ago, I can remember so many different scenes. And I remember this one woman was beating this guy. He was kind of a skinnier, he looked like he might have even been half Asian.
Yep.
And
I remember that vividly.
Yeah, she was beating him with a meat tenderizer, I think. Like a metal mallet with all these little spikes on it. She was hitting him like on his back and butt, I think.
But he
was on like a crucifixion.
Yeah, he's hanging from his arms. I will say though,
and but here's my point. My point is that you and I looking at that are like, what is going on? But to those two individuals, this is a wonderful Saturday night.
It felt safe. Like for me, like that space felt safe,
right?
In this weird, bizarre way,
right? So when people are going into that world, it's safe, but they want to be tied up, and then the way people were talking to each other, they were humiliating. They had that one thing where you would go. Remember, the Alina Gabosh was like the leader. She recently passed away, actually. She said, you can step into this cage, and if you just wait there, a dominatrix will come, or a dominant, whoever you want in terms of gender, will come and take you and beat you and humiliate you.
I got into the cage and Lita started like saying dominating things to me.
Lita was our, so at the beginning of the podcast, co-host. It was me and Berto and Lita. And anyway, so when we look at that, we're like, well, that's foreign to us. But to them, this is what turns them on. And for some people, it's the only thing that turns them on. The reason why I'm even going into this is because I want to delineate what is a wonderful celebration of human diversity and sexuality and participation and bonding and sensation and feelings and expression and having an experience with other people. There's a huge difference between legit consensual BDSM and what Marilyn Manson does, because people, I think, are going to associate him with BDSM, and what he is doing is not. He's in some ways adopting the label. He's trying to hide behind the label of BDSM or the label of this world of consensual horror fascination by actually abusing human beings. And it appears that for years he actually likes to do this, and maybe has liked to do it from a very young age and managed to keep it at bay, maybe even while he was married. But then with Evan Rachel Wood, he started to let it out. He started to actually act out his fantasies that he always kind of wanted to do with people, and then learned he could get away with it, and then he just did it to many other people beyond that. That's my point.
Yeah.
So final word, Berto.
Yeah. So we've struggled with this in the past. I will now have to make a decision. This one is easier for sure than Michael Jackson or something, because I don't generally listen. But even today, as I was doing a little research, I felt a little guilty about watching the videos. But at the same time, I kind of reminded myself, well, what is it to me? Like, I know we have our podcast and we talk about things that are current, but beyond this, like, I'm just not going to think about this too much, because it's not me. I'm not the accuser. I'm not the victim. And I don't know. They should pursue this in court if they can. The thing that I can do is I can make a decision for what I patronize. And in this case, based on the evidence, I'm not going to listen to his music for now. Anyways, I don't feel any need to. But at the same time, I also feel sad. I feel sad for everyone involved, because as I was again doing a little research, I read a little bit about some of the other people that were in the band. I don't know if you read that his Marilyn Manson's mom might have had what's that Munchausen thing by proxy? Really? Like, yeah, where she apparently thought that Brian was always sick, and and taking him in and out of hospitals. She also told him a story that when he was 8 or 9, someone broke in the house and tried to choke him to death. And he has no memory of this. Really? Well, that would actually explain something, because when you do that to someone, that will really mess with your head and your sense of your own body and your sense of morality when it comes to other people's bodies. I didn't hear that. So if this is true, I'm like, man, there's sadness, because there's little kids that get distorted when they're little, and then they distort other people when they're grown up. Yeah. The final word for me is that everything in this episode was a complete allegation. I have no idea of the reality of any of these charges. They seem absolutely credible, the case that people are making against him, but of course, it's all just allegations. I have no inside knowledge on whether or not it's true. The other thing I'll say is that we need to change the laws around the statute of limitations for this in the United States. Not just some of the states, but all the states this needs to be a federal thing that changes for everyone. The other thing is that we need to put an end to this kind of stuff. Every time this happens, it sort of feels like, okay, that's the last one, right? Because surely anyone else would have come out by now. But no, in another year or another month or a couple years from now, there's going to be another big shocker. It's going to be someone else, and we're going to be like, here we are again. Yeah. And we need to change it. The reason why this happens, for all of you listening right now, we all indirectly support the notions that contribute to shaming victims by when these allegations come out in the media, by not paying attention to them, by also supporting laws and practices in the justice system that
shame and harm people. Everyone who wants to know the specifics on this, watch that TV series that we watched on Netflix a while ago called Unbelievable. Remember that, Berto? Watch Unbelievable. It really lays out why so many victims are shamed into silence, or they learn from experience that it's just better not to make a report. And that's without societal backlash. That's without fandom lashing out at you and doxing you and wanting to harm you. We need to change this. We need more victims' rights. We need more victim protections. We need more systems in place. We need to change our culture. We need to change the journalistic system. We need to change our attitudes. We need to look at famous people through a different lens, rich people through a different lens. We need to stop allowing lawyers the ability to shut people up about this. That needs to be a crime. Yeah. These kinds of things need to be out in the open, because why? Because all of us don't want perpetrators just running loose, harming us and other people that we care about. It's just an obvious thing that we need to change. We need to change sexism. We need to change classism. All of these things. We need to start bringing sexuality more out in the open so that people don't just, titter and turn the other way. We need to talk about kink and BDSM so we can differentiate between the vast majority of consensual, ethical BDSM and whatever he was alleged to be doing. Yep. We need to change all these things, and only then will we be able to reduce the possibility of more victimization. Until then, we're going to see this happening over and over and over again. And I guess we also need early intervention on children, such as Marilyn Manson when he was a kid. Maybe if there were more people to help him and his family, that this whole thing could have been headed off at the pass in terms of the development of his personality. All right, everyone out there, please take care of yourself and take a deep breath and remind yourself that you're safe right now. If you're feeling a little tense on the inside, just relax and take note of your own emotions, because some of the stuff can be pretty heavy. And take care of yourself and take care of others, because
you deserve it.